Welcome to Brazen Education with Educator Barnes, a podcast with a focus on speaking your truth, being transparent to help others, and having no shame about it. Because we can't move forward until the truth is known. Welcome back to another episode of Brazen Education. Today we're talking about math. We've done a lot of talking about different educational issues, a lot about literacy, but we really haven't taken the time to dive into the math conversation. So I hope that this is going to be one of many conversations where I get to talk to educators about math. With us today, we have Akil Parker. He is the CEO of All This Math. He's a professor and educator in Philadelphia. Akil, welcome to Brazen Education.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
So I'm going to start with the question that maybe a lot of people have. All this math, what is it, and what led you to get on this path to start All This Math? What need were you trying to fill?
Well, All This Math is, I guess if I could be dramatic about it, I would say it's like a movement, you know. It started out as just a simple math tutoring company. And then, I started to expand out and get into educational consulting work and, professional development, teacher coaching, things of that nature. And during the pandemic, I started a YouTube channel. And then as time progressed, I was adding content and adding videos to my YouTube channel on a regular basis, because I realized that, while I was tutoring, I'm only one person, and also recruited my son to tutor with me. So, the two of us, we couldn't tutor everybody. And some people didn't have the resources or didn't have the means. So I was like, well, if you have, a laptop, a tablet, a smartphone, and you have Wi-Fi, then you should also be able to get access to top tier quality, math instruction, and tutorial videos. So I started the YouTube channel, and, we've been rocking with that since 2020. And currently we have almost 600 videos uploaded and across different topics of math, from elementary level math, learning how to, add, subtract, multiply, and divide, all the way up through calculus. So All This Math also offers that. And we recently just published a book called How to Use All This Math, Volume 1, because I'm our parents to be able to have the confidence and the ability themselves to prepare their children for math class. And that I'm really trying to work toward a significant paradigm shift, because a lot of us don't think of having to prepare our children for math class. We have all been, I think most of us, if not all of us, have been conditioned to just think that, well, we have our responsibility as parents is to make sure our children are well behaved, they're clothed, they arrive on time, and they're respectful to the teacher, and they're present, right? And then y'all the teachers, y'all the classroom teachers, y'all went to college, and the principal, y'all all went to college and everything, and y'all can teach all the math, right? And we see that doesn't really work. So the book, in addition to the YouTube channel, but the book is an actual tangible resource that can help you as a parent develop a strong foundation for your children in arithmetic as well as in algebra. Now, this is volume 1. Volume 2 it doesn't have much geometry in volume 1, but volume 2, which is already in the works, is going to have a significant portion of geometry in it. So what I'm trying to do is empower our community and empower our parents to be able to take everyday activities, because each chapter, there are 20 short chapters in the book. Each chapter is where I take an everyday activity, something like, going to the grocery store, coming in the kitchen to get a snack, taking a ride in the car to run errands or do whatever you got to do. And I show you how those can be actual teachable moments where you can show, algebra, you can show arithmetic skills, and you can reinforce them, and it can become a daily practice. Because what I also want to have happen is a lot of our children, as I said, are not prepared for math class, right? So, but they are prepared for ELA class a lot of times, right? Even though there may be significant deficiencies, even still, the children don't have the same level of anxiety when they go into English class or ELA class as they do in math class, in part because when you're growing up in a household and English is the first language, you're having conversations in English. You're reading the English language, you're writing in the English language. So you're already kind of innately practicing the English language in preparation for when you go into English class as a young child. So then when you look on the board, you see words and you see, okay, These are the vocabulary terms for today. A lot of students might be like, oh, yeah, we use that all the time in my household. That ain't no big thing, right? Some students might not know it, but then a lot of students are still going to be confident because they're more familiar. However, in math class, a lot of students are kind of going into math class as a blank slate, not really knowing anything, right? Which leads to that anxiety and the development of that math phobia, consequently. So what I'm trying to do is avoid and help parents to protect their children from developing math anxiety and developing math phobia, because it's out there. And if they go into math class unprepared, if they go into math class without knowing what a percentage is, without knowing what a ratio or proportion is, without understanding their multiplication facts, without knowing their addition facts already, different things like that, without understanding and having a command of fractions as a concept, and also how to add and subtract, multiply and divide fractions, which are a lot of things that we have traditionally just allowed for schools to take the full responsibility of, right? But we see what has happened, right? So what I want is to provide this resource so that parents can feel comfortable taking that ownership of that. So kind of what the book also kind of is, it's like a guide for parents that see the value in homeschooling, but they can't homeschool for whatever reason. So I'm like, well, cool. Even if you work a 9 to 5, in the time that you are spending around your children, I'm going to show you what the teachable moments are that are right in front of you, that you can capitalize on and you can leverage. And you can take those opportunities and say, y'all are just riding it. Like if you're driving to school in the morning to take your children to drop them off at school, there's a lot of opportunities right there that I talk about in the book. Or when you pick them up and you're in the pickup line, and you wait in the line, to pick your kids up, and your kids hop in the car and they all are riding home. Y'all might have to stop at the grocery store first and all that. I'm gonna show you all the opportunities there too. So that's what All This Math is. So all of that is part of the offering of All This Math. But what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to teach math to the entire Black community. I really am. And I want to also empower parents to be able to feel confident to help their own children with their math homework. Because a lot of parents have what I call a homework help ceiling. Different parents hit that ceiling at different ages and levels or grades for their children. Some hit that ceiling at like 3rd grade, some hit it at 6th grade, some hit it at 7th grade. But I have this kind of wild notion that parents should be able to help their child with their math homework for as long as they live in their house. So if you got a 12th grader taking pre-calculus and he's trying to grab hyperbolas and ellipses and parabolas, I want you to be able to do that. I want you to understand how to help them with that, right? And that's what the YouTube channel is for. So that's, and that kind of gives a kind of somewhat of a synopsis of like what, All This Math is about and what we're trying to do.
Well, one of the things that you hear when you hear about math, you hear people say, well, I'm not a math person. I don't do math, which is interesting enough. You never really hear people say, I'm not a reading person. I'm not a writing person. That's not a thing we say. But in society, we get real comfortable with saying, like, I'm not a math person. Additionally, you have parents who are like, oh, this is that new math. I can't do this new math. So how do you, through your work with All This Math, how do you go up against those notions where you have grownups who feel like, I'm not a math person. I can't do math. This new math, they teach you math in some different way. I can't pick it up. Buddy, you're on your own. Like, how are you addressing that through your work?
So I try to stay consistent with adding content and, having a presence on social media and, trying to be like, try to capitalize on like a lot of the current trends and popular culture and whatnot, and try to make people more comfortable with math. Because one of the things I say is, kind of part of our mission at All This Math is to improve the relationship between the Black community and mathematics. Because it really is a relational issue. It's a relationship issue. Like it's an uncomfortable relationship that a lot of people have with math due to some traumatic educational experiences that they had when they were young that were never repaired. They never healed from, basically, and a lot of people had them, even like I've had them, even though for the vast majority of my K through 12 experience, math was cool. I was good, in my math classes, but I definitely had some rough patches that I even think about. I think about from time to time when I'm in tutoring sessions or when a student sends me his or her work in advance and I'm looking over it and I'm thinking about, oh man, like, logarithms, you know what I mean? And I'm like, and I get a little nervous, but then I calm down and I'm like, no, wait, no, you know how to do this, right? You know, so it's like that, like self-doubt and that imposter syndrome creeps up even within me, you know, sometimes, but I'm able to overcome it because there's demonstrated evidence that I'm like that, you know, shows me that no, Akil, you know how to do this, you know how to do this work. But so I try to, you know, make people more comfortable with math and make people believe that they can actually learn it. Because I think that's a key element too. And it's sometimes difficult to articulate and even, you know, necessarily duplicate and show other people how to make other people feel that way. But you got to like make a person feel like they can learn something, or make a person feel like math is for them. Because a lot of times there are certain things that happen in public school classrooms, charter school classrooms, private school classrooms that lead children to believe that, no, this class isn't for me. And it may be done unwittingly by the teacher or by just the culture of the school to make people feel that way. So conversely, we can try to like make people feel like they can do math, make people feel like they can succeed in it by showing it to them in a way where it's simplified, you know, showing it to them in a way that makes sense, showing it to them in a way that is relevant, you know, as an example, you know, because I'm so immersed in math, I'm constantly thinking about math and thinking about ways to apply it in everyday life. I went to the laundromat, you know, with my daughter and my son earlier today, like 2 hours ago, and I did, you know, wash and fold service. So I dropped the laundry off. So they charge $1.50 per pound. But also if you want to get a comforter washed, they charge you a flat $16. So as I'm thinking about that, I'm like, wait, and I've never got it. I'm kind of cheap. So usually I don't get the wash. I go in there, I wash the comforter myself, right? Mm-hmm. But this time I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna just let them do it, even though that $16 sounds like a lot. But I realized that, wait, this is a Y equals MX plus B situation. So a lot of people are like, you know, another day that went by, they think they never learned the relevance of Y equals MX plus B. They never learned the relevance of linear equations. They never learned the relevance of, you know, graphs and whatnot. So this is a situation where you can apply Y equals MX plus B, you know, because you're starting out with $16. You've got to pay that, you know, that's flat. That's a flat rate, a flat fee, right? That's for the comforter. That's the variable B. The Y is your total amount that you're going to have to pay, right? Or that I would have to pay. And that was on my receipt, the total amount. The M is the cost per pound, right? So they charge like $1.49. So that's my M value, $1.49. X is the number of pounds, right? So you do the $1.49 times the number of pounds, and they weigh it. You know, they got the scale in there. You put the bags on the scale, they weigh it for you, and plus that $16. You know, and what it enables us to do is be able to predict how much it's going to be, instead of like what a lot of us do, even as consumers. We kind of we're kind of beholden to and at the mercy of the store or the store owner. And, you know, they might be using a computer, but the computer could be wrong. Like I was in that same laundromat like a year ago, and that computer was out of whack. And that computer was about to charge me like $90 for like a $30, you know, wash and fold job. But because I had mind and the awareness, I'm like, wait, hold up. I know this is $1.49 per pound, and this ain't that heavy. So why is this telling me, right? Now, I know a lot of us would feel like we would just have this feeling, this intuitive feeling like, no, that seemed a little bit high. But then let somebody tell you like, no, but the computer says this. So if you're a person that doesn't have that confidence in your math ability, oftentimes a lot of us would just go with it and be like, yeah, well, you know, it must be. You know, the computer said it. You know, if the computer said it, the computer can never be wrong. But because we don't have that, our own, you know, internal mathematical ability, we get taken advantage of. So this is another thing that, you know, I don't want people to be taken advantage of, you know. So I want people to like develop those math skills, think about what Y equals MX plus B is for, and all the other formulas that people talk about, you know, like what they can be used for in everyday experiences. But also even deeper than that, it's really about problem solving ability, you know, developing problem solving ability. And that's kind of hidden, you know, that's on the deeper level, because it's hard to really show somebody that, especially a young person, because while you're like, well, granted, you may never be in a grocery store and have to take out a piece of paper and use the quadratic formula, right? Mm-hmm. I've never done it. It's never happened to me. I've never been in a grocery store, right? Took out, you know, a piece of paper and wrote that X equals, you know, negative B plus minus the square root B squared minus 4AC and all that. I never had to do that. But from all those years and all those examples and all those times when I was learning it and practicing as a student, when I've taught it over the years, over and over again, just, my mind just kind of being trained and conditioned to think about information in a systematic way and in a very organized and methodical way. I definitely use that when I go grocery shopping, because if I got a limited amount of resources and a limited amount of money, I say I got $150 to spend on groceries. I know I got to feed this many people and this food got to last for this amount of time. Those are my variables right there. Right. And I want to do this in the most efficient way possible. So I got to approach this in a certain way. Right. And we all, that's another thing too. A lot of us already do this. We're doing it already anyway. We just don't think that it's math, but it really is a mathematical approach to life that a lot of us are already taking. Some people are able to do it better than others. Some people get frustrated and are just like, I don't care. I'm gonna just get whatever I want. And then their money runs out and then they got like groceries for like 3 days. And then but that money was supposed to last for 2 weeks worth of groceries. But they didn't think critically and think strategically. Right. So that these are some of the things that, I try to do to try to help parents to just kind of see like how, they can be a quote unquote math person, because anybody can be a math person. There's no math gene. A lot of people say there's a math gene, but, you just have to be taught, certain skills, and then you have to have the opportunity to practice on a regular.
So you're really saying it's really about perspective, because I think most people assume that literacy is all around them, right? You have words on books, even if I'm typing the text message, even if I'm using shortened language, I am using literacy, I'm communicating. But I think sometimes people don't think about like there's literally math all around me all the time. And we're not even explicit. Because I think about my own boys. I have identical twin sons who are 12 now. But we'll be in the store and I said, well, what would the sale tax be on this? Because I told them, you don't ever want to be in the situation where you've gotten up to the register, they'd have ranged up all your food and your items, and then you were short money. First off, everybody behind you going to be irritated. But second of all, you should have a plan for yourself. You should be able to guess if you got $20 for whatever you need to get, you should be under that $20 and not be at the register nervous as the prices are going up. So even thinking about, and even as a parent, I have to be more cognizant of like, oh, I need to stop and actually have this conversation, because many times we do these things in our head. We do these things in our heads as adult, and really didn't think about, oh, I should probably say this to my son. My background is literacy, so I do a lot of stuff with literacy. And one of the things I have found is that some teachers are not confident in their literacy skills. So in your work, do you feel that some of the adults that struggle with math are also people that are teaching math? And if so, how have you helped tackle that in your work when you have the teacher saying, I don't know how to teach this math skill to my students?
So I would say definitely there's a lot of quote unquote math teachers that really that are not content area specialists. They don't mastery. And I would even say that, when I started my teaching career, I was in that group. I would be in that category. I think I have mastery at this level and I've had it for several years. But when I first started back in 2005, I really didn't. Even though I knew a lot of math, because then when you get into pedagogy, that's a whole other thing.
Right.
How to teach it. Because, that's why like a lot of students complain about college professors, because you got, somebody that's got a PhD in pure math and they've been, they was doing calculus when they was 8 years old and all that. And they know the content, to a certain degree, but you can't show it to me though, because you may have learned it a certain way and you learn in a way that works for you. In terms of differentiating instruction, that's foreign to you because you've never cared enough to think about it necessarily in different ways or how to explain it to a person with a different perspective from you, different background from you, right? So another thing I would say too is that a lot of teachers are probably in the same situation that I was in early on, which is they had a strong procedural understanding of mathematics while lacking a conceptual understanding of mathematics. Because I was the type of student where, if you give me, just give me the formula. My whole thing is, look, just give me the formula. Once you show me how to take the numbers and replace the letters, and then go through and just use order of operations or, use whatever method I need to use to get to the answer and solve for the variable or whatever, I'm cool. I like that, because that when I was young, that reminded me of playing video games. Because in a video game, all you're doing is looking for patterns so you can beat. So math to me was the same way. I'm just looking for the pattern. Oh, when I see a problem that looks like this is what I got to do. Okay, and it works every time, no matter what numbers are in there. When I see a problem that looks like this, I got to do this different thing. And when it works every time, no matter what numbers are in there, right? But if you asked me, and then you ask a lot of people, well, why does this work? Why does long division work? Like I can memorize, long division, divide, multiply, subtract. I tell students that all the time. DMS, right? Remember that DMS, divide, multiply, subtract, then drop the number down, start the process over again. But back in the day, I couldn't explain to you why division made sense. And I couldn't explain to you what actually is happening when you're dividing. And I definitely couldn't explain to you, well, why is division essentially repeated subtraction? I couldn't tell you that. I didn't know, and I didn't care, right? But I think that if you're going to explain these concepts and these topics to children, I think it's very important to be able to have those explanations, because then the math becomes conversational, right? As opposed to very abstract and, overly objective, because it is objective. I think objectivity can be good, but when you're overly objective and you can't make it seem more human, you can't make it interpersonal, then you really can't talk about it, as in a story format, then it's difficult to really explain to a lot of people, right? But there definitely are a lot of teachers that don't know the math, and but they can kind of hide because they're seen oftentimes as the smart people, right? People in our society, we think that, well, if you're good at math, then you're naturally just, very intelligent. We tend to think, well, a lot of people won't say it, but they think, oh, well, this person knows math, so they must be, they might be smarter than me, so I'm not even going to try to challenge them, So a lot of people can kind of hide behind that because they're like, okay, well, ain't nobody going to say nothing to me anyway, But then, a lot of times there are other dynamics at play too, because, you get into issues with job security, and you might not want to admit that you need help, right? Because you don't know what an administrator is going to do. An administrator might take that information and use it against you.
Right.
You never know. So you might not want to be as open with sharing the fact that you have some of your own deficiencies, right? So there's definitely a lot of that. And that's why, I talk to my students at Cheney about this, because I teach, the math methods courses. And a lot of the students want to teach K through 8. Most of them want to teach the low levels, like kindergarten, first grade, second grade. One of the main reasons they want to do that is because they might have been a student that did not excel in mathematics overall. So when they got to high school, algebra was a challenge, geometry was a challenge, pre-calculus was a challenge. So they're saying to themselves, yeah, I want to teach, but I don't want to teach high-level math, right? So I'm just going to stay here in kindergarten, right? I want to teach people how to count. I want to teach addition facts, subtraction facts. But therein lies a problem, because if you don't really have a strong understanding of what's happening way down the road, then it's difficult to prepare a young child, and give them the fundamentals and a strong foundation that will enable them to get way down the road, right? Because I think that when we're teaching, my son is 4 years old. My youngest child is 4 years old. As I teach him math skills, I'm teaching him math skills in terms of counting and addition and subtraction and whatnot, with the idea that one day he's going to be learning calculus. One day I'm going to be showing him calculus, right? We're going to be talking about derivatives and integrals and chain rule and all that type stuff, right? That's what I'm thinking about. So when I'm explaining these fundamental concepts, I got that in the back of my mind. But that's because I have some understanding of that higher level math. If you don't have the understanding of that higher level math, then when you're showing young children how to count, how to add and subtract, then it's most likely you're not going to be able to make those connections for them, right? Just like I remember, I'll never forget, I had an elementary school teacher. I don't even remember what their name was, but I know for a fact they told me that you cannot do 3 minus 5. I'll never forget, they told me you can't do 3 minus 5. What they meant to say was using positive numbers, but they left that part, right? Mm-hmm. So I went years until I got to 6th grade when we started dealing with the number line, learning about positive and negative integers. and that just negative numbers until I knew, you can do 3 minus 5. They lied to me back in the day, right? So, but imagine there could be people that don't really have a grasp of negative numbers and negative values. So they might be telling children, no, you can't do this, or you can't do that. Or the explanation might not be as precise, right? And that happens, across a lot of levels, right? Because a lot of times the definition of something in math that would be sufficient for an Algebra 1 class with 8th graders might not be sufficient for a college level Calculus 3 class.
Right.
But again, if your goal for those 8th graders is not to get them to a Calc 3 class, if you just want them to get a certain score on a standardized test as an 8th grader, and you're not even thinking about them being in a Calculus 3 class, then your explanation is going to be a certain way. And that explanation might actually be limiting, because when they get to that next level or get to that higher level, then they're going to be confused, because they're going to be like, wait a minute, but I was told, and all this time I thought that you couldn't do this. So, then there's going to be a lot of contradictions that, present themselves.
Now, when you said that whole thing about 3 minus 5, you can't do it, it reminded me of a teacher telling me that you couldn't start a sentence was because. And I go through my whole school, and then I get up to high school, and the teacher's like, yeah, you can start a sentence with because, and they're going to end up with a comma in the middle of your sentence, and then you'll have the rest, you'll have another independent clause joined to that, but you can't start a sentence with because. But that teacher didn't want,
and all the you can't start a sentence with the words and, but,
Yep.
I remember hearing that too.
Yeah, so don't start with a conjunction because but what they were really trying to say to you is you're not going to have a complete sentence. Instead of saying or knowing how to say it, but you brought up so many points because I think we are limiting children. We're limiting children to be like, well, you probably won't. Because I even remember when I was in high school, people were saying, well, do you really want to take, pre-cal? You don't really need to take pre-cal if you're going to go into English. And I'm like, yeah, I do feel like I need to take pre-cal regardless of what I'm going to do when I get to college. Because when I went to college, I actually started off as an elementary educator, and then I did math education for a little bit, and then I switched over to English education. And it wasn't not the math was harder or anything. I really wanted to double major in both, but that was a 7-year plan, and I just wasn't trying to be in school for 7 years. But I like both of the subjects equally. But the fact that teachers were saying, oh, you don't need to worry about that. So I like what you're saying about not only are we not giving correct explanations, the explanations we are giving is limiting to children. So recently in the literacy world, you had Emily Hanford, who is a journalist who's behind The Soul of Story. Mm-hmm. And it talks about how, schools have been buying curriculum that's not based on research. People have not been teaching, reading correctly. Do you feel like we need that type of reckoning in the math world? And if so, what do you think it will look like? Do you think there's some faulty math curriculum out here that we're using that we need to abandon?
So I think part of the issue is that NCTM is a monopoly, and
tell people what NCTM is if they don't know what that is.
National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. So what it essentially is it's a group of mathematicians and math educators that basically get together and decide what the quote unquote best practices are for math, right? So it's kind of like, I guess it's similar with within the English, language learning world. You have a body of people that get together and just decide, what it is, what it should be and what it should not be. And it's not a lot of competition, or maybe there's no, there aren't competing, there might be small independent, groups of people that may say, well, no, I think we should do it this way, or we should do it this way, and that's fine. But a lot of times those small independent voices don't make their way. Their ideology or their pedagogical style does not make it into a lot of the public schools and the charter schools around the country. Right. You might see some of that work in independent spaces, independent educational spaces. But I definitely think that, I think another issue is this, and this is why I think it's actually revolutionary to learn math and to become proficient and to master math. When you think about it like this, right? Math to me is synonymous with problem solving.
Mm.
Develop these skills in math. You develop, math competency, but you're simultaneously developing is problem solving competency. But we also have to zoom out and look at the larger picture, right? In Western society, we live in a capitalist, neo-colonial structure, right? Governmental, cultural type structure, where oppression is the norm and there's a zero game. So in order for there to be winners, there have to be a lot of losers in this system. So we also have to keep in mind, and again, this is why learning math is important, because of the way it trains us to think. When we think about a problem, oftentimes the way the media will present it to us is though it's everybody's problem. Like we're all suffering, like all 8 billion, like we identify a problem, we talk about it, and then we say, okay, well, or we're led to believe that all 8 billion people on earth are being harmed by this problem. But in fact, the way things are often structured is, as I said, it's a zero-sum game. And this ties into like game theory, the game theory field of mathematics, zero-sum two-player game theory, where in order for there to be winners, there have to be losers. So essentially, if I have a problem, there's somebody out there that's benefiting from my problem. So if I know how to solve my problem, and then I proceed to solve my problem, now that person or that entity that was benefiting from my problem, now they have a problem because they have lost their benefit. So I'm a firm believer that since I equate math competency with problem solving competency, if we can keep millions of people literally from learning how to solve problems, but also from even thinking that they should be able to learn how to solve problems, or, well, I should say from thinking that math is relevant, because a lot of people think math is irrelevant. A lot of people think math is too difficult. What they're actually saying is that problem solving is irrelevant and problem solving is too difficult. So therefore, if we can train and condition millions of people to believe that and think that way, all of those groups and entities and individuals that benefit from the problems of these millions of people, they are safe and they can be comfortable. So I think and this is something that, I learned from studying the late Amos Wilson. One of the things he talked about was, in an educational system such as this, how can those that control the educational system, the challenge for them is not how to help people to learn, but the challenge for them is how can we maintain the status quo of the society? We can keep America the way it's been since it was founded, right? But at the same time, give the impression that we actually are trying to change things and that we actually are trying to help people to learn. So it's like, how do we, this balancing act? Because we really want to keep things the same, right? We really don't want people to learn math. Because if people learn math, that's when people start to think, they start to ask questions, they might start to challenge things that have been in place for a very long time. They start questioning authority, they start speaking truth to power. All these types of consequences come just from teaching people math. And also even keeping people in the mindset that math is just X plus Y equals 14.
Yeah.
But in fact, math is really teaching you how to think and how to identify problems, how to break down problems, how to solve problems. And that's a transferable skill that you can apply anywhere in your own personal life, with a loved one, with a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, your supervisor at your job, the person on the phone or customer service that's being rude to you when you're trying to get your refund for a service you never got. All of these types of things. The person that cuts you off in traffic, on the highway or wherever. All of these things are problems that, if we have a systematic way to approach and solve, then life will be better. But once you get people to understand and believe firmly, no, this is irrelevant, or it's too hard, either it's irrelevant or it's too difficult, right? A lot of times actually believing that it's too difficult precedes the belief in irrelevancy, because a lot of times the belief in irrelevancy is like an ego protective measure. Because it's kind of like, well, this is dumb anyway. Like, I don't need this anyway, right? It's admitting like, I feel like I have a deficiency. It's hard sometimes to admit when you have a deficiency. So I'd rather just say, well, this ain't relevant anyway. I don't need to know this, So that's kind of like the latter response.
And what have you seen with females? Because there's a lot of conversation around. Not only do you have people saying I'm not a math person, I can't do math, this is silly. There's also been a lot of conversation around how girls may feel like, as because they are a girl, because I mean, you and I both know your gender doesn't is not a limiting factor of your ability to learn math. What do you think about that conversation about girls, and what can people do differently? They're math educators listening right now. What can they do differently to make girls feel more confident that they can do math, and them being a girl has nothing to do with that?
So I definitely know that there's a lot of historical precedent and a lot of historical record of a lot of women, especially, in the Black community, just a lot of Black women that were PhDs in mathematics, that were high-level mathematicians, that have been high-level mathematics teachers. I think those stories need to be told more effectively, by people such as myself. The community, the general community needs to be educated more on, exemplars and the examples of Black women that were mathematicians, these Black women that were PhDs, that taught math for, many, many years. Even going back into the earlier history, hundreds of years ago, or even thousands of years ago, and maybe in ancient Kemet, going back to Hypatia, even though some textbooks claim that Hypatia was Greek. I always question that. I need to do further research on that myself, but I would like to believe that she was a Black woman, right? But those are stories that have to be told, because oftentimes you have to see yourself in a subject. And I think that just like with Black boys, a similar way with Black boys, I think Black people in general are made to feel by a lot of the prevailing propaganda around mathematics that math just isn't a subject for us. Math is some white people stuff, and that's how, I never hear people explicitly come out and say that. Like Pearson or Harcourt, Brace, Jovanovich, the textbook companies won't come out directly and say that. They won't print that in the book, but they'll print a textbook that only has white people in it, that are mathematicians, or only formulas that are named after, white folks, Europeans and whatnot. So as a child, an intelligent child may arrive at that conclusion anyway.
And even some of the math stuff that comes, because like when you get a curriculum, you get all this other swag stuff. And so a lot of times I'll see my colleagues, I'll go into their math classroom, and even all the posters they get, they're like white mathematicians. And so if you're sitting in that classroom, you're not a white child, the message that's not maybe being explicitly saying that you can't do math, it's in your face. What the teacher is teaching this person, there's no melanin in these images. So I think that's also important, just seeing those images and finding ways to incorporate those stories in the class, because I know teachers are like, I got to get through all this curriculum, but sometimes the belief internally in the student to try more may be engaged if they just get that snippet of, this moment in math history. I want to tell you about this particular mathematician. So I have a question for you about math facts. So that normally, when you talked about the homework help ceiling, I feel like most parents are like, I think I can help them with some math facts. And I've heard people like, make them do flashcards, make them do rote memorization, get them on extra math. And I know you got a lot of resources in all this math. But because that's the thing, that's like the entry point, right? I'm going to teach my kid how to count some numbers. I'm going to help them learn these math facts. And even my own boys, they got time on these math facts. They had to do these certain amount of worksheets under a certain amount of time. What approach do you suggest to parents who, because that's like the floor, like of entry into homework help. What suggestions do you have for parents who are like, even that is hard? They're like, my kid's not even getting the math facts.
So, well, they're not getting the math facts now. So we're talking about multiplication facts?
So
as a start?
That's good. So let me clarify. So typically what I've seen is like you have to know X amount of addition facts, X amount of subtraction facts, X amount of division facts, and the X amount of multiplication facts. So like multiplication, you got to know all the way through your 12s. You got to know all the way to 12 times 12. Right. And a lot of times, just like parents get reading logs, my kid has to read 20 minutes a night. Like my kids had a math log. They had to practice math. And even myself as a parent, I'm like, okay, you're being compliant, but you're like, is this the most effective way? So I know there was like a lot of questions in there, but
I think it is.
Question.
I'm from the school of thought where I look at, I played sports growing up. I played football in high school and I played Little League baseball for many years. And the only way we became better was through practice and repetition. So I'm from the school of thought where I'm like, if you want to become great at something, you got to do it every day. You got to practice it every single day. And then what you'll notice is that it becomes, you start to memorize it. Like I believe that students should, as an example with multiplication facts, there's a school of thought of people that say that we shouldn't memorize multiplication facts.
Mm-hmm.
And
yep.
I think they should be memorized. However, I also think that memorization should be accompanied by a conceptual understanding of, what is 9 times 8? Like, what does that mean? Like, I think a child should be able to not only tell me that 9 times 8 is 72, but also should be able to tell me intelligently, have an intelligent conversation with me about what that represents, and why. Like, I might even ask, like, why is multiplication a gift, essentially, that already learned addition? Another issue with the way math is taught. When we get to successive levels of math topics, children often internalize it as like a punishment. It's like, well, I just learned addition. Why are you teaching me multiplication? This is harder now.
Yeah.
But again, it goes back to my point earlier about that storytelling aspect in a math class, because I believe that we should just have these candid conversations with children and just let them know, like, look, if we don't do multiplication, when it comes time for you to multiply 398 times 574, we can figure that out without multiplying, but we don't got time to sit up here and add 398 plus 398 plus 398 plus 398 574 times. We don't got time for all that.
Right.
Do it. If you like addition so much, cool. Like, you don't want to sit up here, like, how much time that's going to take, how much paper that's going to take, right? Right? How many resources that's going to take. So we have to realize that, like, if I teach you multiplication, what I'm giving you is a shortcut. I'm giving you a cheat code, right? So when we get into more advanced math, a lot of times it's perceived as if, oh, this is more difficult now. Now I'm angry and I'm tense and I'm anxious now. But in fact, what I'm doing is I'm giving you a cheat code, really. So you can, like, have a stronger mastery of numbers generally and of numeracy, really. So that's really what I'm doing. But again, that's a conversation that, teachers have to have with young people, right? Parents have to have with their children, because once your child masters a certain amount of addition and subtraction facts, and then you say, okay, now we about to go into multiplication and division, and they get a little tense, they get upset, they might suck their teeth and get angry. It's like, you got to, like, a lot of times as parents, we might just be like, deal with it. We take a very stern approach. But I think we should also, have a conversation with them, like, look, you got an option. Like, what if I don't teach you this, I'd actually be doing you a disservice. Because if I don't teach you how to multiply, again, like even like something like 9 times 8, if I don't teach you that 9 times 8 is 72, or I don't show you how to memorize that, or show you why 9 times 8 is 72, you're gonna have to commit to, for the rest of your life, doing 9 plus 9 plus 9 plus 9 plus 9. Okay, 9 plus 9 is 18. 18 plus 9 is 27. 27 plus 9 is 36. 36 plus 9 is 45. And you got to add them 9s 8 times. Or you could just say 9 times 8 is 72. So we don't got time for all that. Right?
No, I definitely was that parent. My boys picked up addition, subtraction, multiplication. When we got to the long division, I was like those people, they're like, it's 2 apples and 2 more apples. I was like, and so I actually tapped a teacher friend of mine. I said, we gonna fight.
You know what I think too? I think, like, because I see those jokes, now's the time of the year when those jokes are real heavy, right?
Yep.
I think one thing that might, calm some children, maybe not all children. I mean, like I said, the storytelling aspect. If Johnny has 5 apples, let's talk about why Johnny got 5 apples. Like, why does this one little boy need 5 apples? Like, let's have that conversation. Like, because people make the jokes about only in math class will a person have 987 bananas, and nobody asks a question about like why they have that many bananas. I think we should ask those questions, and we should have a conversation. Maybe before we even get into the actual computation, you say like, "Yo, why does he need 5 apples? What's he gonna do with these 5 apples?" And then maybe you take it to a story. It's like, okay, well, maybe he's gonna make a smoothie or something, or he's gonna.
Yeah. And I think this person here, Sebastian, really tapped into it. Sebastian says, from my perspective, I am from Poland. In schools, there are no practical uses of math, only stories about watermelons, apples, etc. Young students do not realize that math is only a language. And I think we don't talk enough about, like, math is a language, just like the words and the sentences. That's the language that we're learning, because to your point, you're all around literacy, right? But when the English teacher comes in, we're teaching you more about that. And it's with math. Math is literally all around us. But like, as you said, some of the, like, why do we need to take 3 buses to get to this place? Like, what is really happening? But when you get to be an adult, there may be actually a real reason why you have chosen this mode of transportation. And so I think a lot of times in school, we just don't make it real for kids. And so now it's just like you said at the beginning, what is the formula to solve this?
Right.
So I can get the answer, get the grade, and get on with my day. But then you don't understand the math. And I think when parents say new math, is really that we have all, at least from my perspective, been training at procedural math.
Right.
Here's the formula sheet. I remember having that formula sheet in the front of my binder, pull that out, use that, and solve the problem. But if you would ask me, why does this formula work? What is the situation? How does this come together? Why are we using this formula versus that formula? I wouldn't have been able to tell you as a student. I would just be like, that's what the teacher said. The teacher said, use this formula when this occurs, but I couldn't explain why. And I think even though parents may perceive it's taking their kids longer to learn math, I think they're getting more of those problem-solving skills when they're learning math.
They are. Like, I wasn't a fan of like the Common Core at first, because I was like everybody else. I'm, resistant to change, like everybody else. But fortunate for me, I was placed in a position. I got this position at Cheney where I had to teach it. So in order, they say the best teachers are students, right? So I became a student of it. And then I started to realize, I sat back and I said, wait a minute, I really wish I would have knew this 30 years ago, right? When I was on division, this would have helped me to understand the concept. But I was good. Like Ms. Johnson taught me long division, 3rd grade teacher, Russell Soul, taught me long division. But if I'd also learned, if the curriculum had called for us to do some other methods like partial quotients or the box method, or even like on my YouTube channel, I talk about, because I try to stay very culturally responsive. I talk about Kemetic division, and like Kemetic multiplication, right? So even like just different methods of just seeing like how we can divide in different ways, right? Which I think Common Core like creates room for that, for people to like, have different approaches, because what you'll realize is when you become more fluent in mathematics generally, you start to recognize, okay, what is the most beneficial approach to the problem based upon how the problem looks. Problem looks this way, okay, this is what I should do, right? Or if the problem looks this way, this is what I should do. And again, take it back to the video games. Let's say it's a fighting game, right? Fighting game, your person in the game, your character in the person has like 4 different weapons, right, that they can access. So then as a gamer, you got to make a decision. Okay, should I use the knife, the gun, the pistol, the machine gun, the bazooka? Like, what should I use based on who I'm up against, right? So that approach and thought process can be applied in math. But what often happens is, like with us coming up, we learned one way to do the problem, and we had that one way all the time. So then it's like, well, but there's another much more efficient way to do this problem based on how this particular problem is set up, but we didn't know that way. So if Common Core is done effectively, then what it should do is empower children to have multiple weapons. And it's like, okay, now, and also have enough practice to have the confidence to be like, okay, I see how this problem looks. Okay, for this problem, I'm about to use this method. Oh, but then number 2 looks like this. Okay, number 2, I'm not using that method. I'm gonna use this other method. And then number three looks different from 1 and 2. So I'm gonna use this other method. And now number 4, okay, number 4 looks like number 2. So I'm going back to that method now, right? And also even like as a child or as a child, teenager, grown adult, having that be that ability to discern when you should apply a certain method is very important. A lot of people don't have that type of discernment. And again, this is a transferable skill. So this is something that you might, unbeknownst to you, be developing while you're in math class in 6th grade, 7th grade, and whatnot. And then what happens is one day you're like, you're a grown man or a grown woman, and then you're in a situation where you can discern, you're at a job or you're out in public, and you can discern, okay, if this is a good idea or if this is not a good idea, right? Because you practiced that skill in math class, and it was kind of embedded within you. You didn't realize that's what you were learning. You didn't realize it at the time, but it just, you tend to approach information a certain way and make decisions a certain way, unbeknownst. And I will say this to another point you were making. I wanted to add this as well about the vocabulary and math being a language. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And one of my major regrets from early in my teaching career is that I didn't approach math vocabulary in the same way that an English teacher would, or the foreign language, a Spanish teacher, or a Yoruba teacher, or Kiswahili teacher would, because there's so many terms, and this is something that like us as math teachers, sometimes we're horrible at this. We take for granted that a child knows what terminology that's very basic to us. We take for they know it. And sometimes you got to just really like I said, like, in Spanish class, you got to translate the sentence, translate this from math language to English language, or even slang. That's why a lot of times in my classes, my students will tell you, they can attest to this. Even in my video content, I'm a heavy advocate of the use of vernacular and slang, because I want you to understand it, right? But I also want you to know the so-called sophisticated formal language that the people from NCTM would say, oh, this is how you describe this, right? I want you to know that language, but I also want you to know it in a way that, makes sense to you. Because when I'm reading math textbooks, even when I was a student and even now as a teacher and a professor, I'm still translating it in my head like, and I grew up in Baltimore, but I've been in Philly for almost the last 20 years. So I'm like, I started teaching in Philly. So, I'm constantly like reading textbooks, and I'm like, okay, so what you got to do is you take this joint and move it over to the other side of the equation and then divide it by the other joint. And that's going through my head, right? So I'm expecting students and young people here in Philly, where I live, that are also experiencing this process and trying to learn math, that I want them to be able to use their everyday language and their vernacular and their slang in order to make sense of what's in this textbook, which is also another reason why I wrote How to Use All This Math Volume 1, because I'm kind of building up toward creating textbook content and workbook content.
Yeah.
Because I realized that, I don't need to be a middleman. Because why should
Come on now.
Translating these other books when I could just write the book myself, and then it doesn't need to be translated, right? We often do. A lot of teachers that are that are culturally responsive, we end up translating the book.
Ooh,
and then well, why we got to translate the book? Why don't we just write our own book? If we write our own book, then our language and the language of our students will be the primary language. And then, what becomes secondary is them understanding, okay, well, this other textbook, this more popular textbook is going to say it this way, right? As opposed to vice versa, where we kind of privilege that other language in the other textbook because we read that book first.
You just tapped into that invisible tax of Black teachers, where we take the content and then we have to mesh it up. And it's funny because as an English teacher, people expect the English teacher to talk in a certain way. But when we're discussing stories and when we're discussing plots, I'm using I'm like, so this character was like, it is what it is. So let's talk about why this character made this choice and why they developed in this way. But I also teach them how to answer the question appropriately in standard English. But like real talk, when we're just talking, we're not going to go and switch over to standard English to explain a situation or a story. We're just going to talk how it is. And then if we're doing a presentation, so I really teach kids about the registers of language. when we use certain voices, and also being comfortable of sliding back in. When I first started doing professional development, I really felt I had to use a certain register language. But now I'll be in standard English and slide right into some vernacular and slide right back, because that's like my actual real life lived experience. And that's the way I can best communicate the information. So I really appreciate you lifting that up. And also, yes, make those textbooks, because you're so right about that. A lot of us make content or re-smash content. And also, like, white folks have been doing this for a minute, because I was just saying earlier today during a PD, I was talking about Kagan strategies, and it's husband and wife team, and all Kagan strategies is cooperative learning. I said all they did was take cooperative learning and write out how you can do it and get in the direction, package it, and sold it. So people have been doing this for years. So why don't we sit down and do it? Why do we keep being the
right? So and to that point about the about language, because I think what often happens is when you have power, right, you're able to add the definitions, right? Mm-hmm. So this is, one of my intellectual heroes, Kwame Ture, right? So this is speeches from the 1960s and 1970s entitled Stokely Speaks. His birth name was Stokely Carmichael, right? But in the first chapter, it's a transcript of a lesson that he was giving in a freedom school while he was in SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, in Mississippi, as he was in one of his summers while he was a college student. And he was talking to these young brothers and sisters that were in the freedom school, and they were like from rural Mississippi, and they didn't speak the so-called standard English, right? Mm-hmm. And he was talking to them about, the people at Harvard, we're taught to think of them and their language as the standard. But he was talking to them about the fact that it's really just a function of power, because if you all had control of an institution here in Mississippi, then the way you talk would be the standard. And then that person from Harvard that talks like how a person from Harvard is expected to talk, if they come in here, then their way of talk is going to be seen as secondary. And there's nothing wrong with it. Like y'all would, and again, that becomes, here we expose the difference oftentimes in the culture, where between cultures, our culture is not going to necessarily marginalize the way that person from Harvard speaks. However, but the way Western society is set up, the person from Harvard is definitely going to try to typically marginalize those young boys and girls in Mississippi, because they're not speaking the King's English. They'll be considered, rural or country or backwards. But it showed how he effectively conveyed to them this idea that, it's really just a function of power. There's nothing wrong with the way that y'all talk. It's just that, people that are in power, they're trying to enforce upon you this idea that your way of talk is less intelligent. It's not, it's inappropriate. It's not formal. But again, there's that like hidden power dynamic, in all of this, even in the math textbook, it's like, okay, they write the math textbook like this, they explain the problems like this. And I'm like, I love when I'm in a teaching situation and I explain something and it don't even sound like anything like what's written in the book. And then the child blurts out, why they ain't just say that then?
Yes.
Like, yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah, exactly. Why they ain't just say that then? Because that's not how they talk. But I'm going to tell you how this should be explained, or how you can make sense of it. And once you can make sense of it, then we can get into doing the work. So, but it's a lot of, it's definitely a lot of overlaps in terms of like, reading the English language and mathematics, and how math is really a language, like the person commented. And because there's so many symbols in math, and then so many, operational symbols, and then also contextually there are differences. Like in this certain scenario, a parentheses might mean this thing, it might mean multiplication over here in this problem. But this other problem, it's more like it's parenthetical, kind of like in the English language, like when we get into functions and we say f of x, but if a child has never seen a function before, they might say, oh, this says f times x, because they don't know. So it's like an issue of code switching. I often talk about how, in the Black community, when you say just the phrase "you good," right, as a question, it can mean different things depending on circumstances. It can mean a concern for your well-being, or it can mean, I feel threatened by you, and I'm letting you know that, I might have to, deal with you like they dealt with them people down in Montgomery, Alabama the other day. But you have to understand the context of the terminology and the symbols in the math problem, the same way we got to do when we're using the English language. Because one symbol might mean something totally different depending on how the problem is set up, but all that has to be learned, so a lot of it is like not knowing the symbols, not knowing the language. Once I explain to you the language and the terminology and the definitions behind it, then if you can speak intelligently about it as a student, about that language and about that terminology, then it's like, okay, cool. Now we can get to the business of actually doing the problems. But it definitely is a language barrier a lot of times,
Yeah. Well, Akil, it has been great chatting with you. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Tell everybody how they can connect with you with all this math on all the places that all this math can be found. So tell them where they can stay connected with you.
Definitely. I definitely enjoyed this conversation. And you can reach me at the website, allthismath.com. Also, our YouTube channel is just go on YouTube and type in @allthismath. Also on the social media sites, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, @allthismath. I'm also Akil Parker on Facebook as well. You can contact me there as well. And check out the book. The book is on sale on Amazon right now. Am I able to talk about that or no?
Yeah, talk about the book. Yes.
Yeah. I know some platforms you're not able to discuss that, but the book, How to Use All This Math, Volume 1. It's a picture supposed to be me and my daughter Asada. She's in a lot of the video content. Once you go to my YouTube channel, I have a lot of videos with her because I'm really just showing people that, in addition to the fact that, I'm a math teacher and a math professor, I'm primarily, before all of that, I'm a father and I have ability to my children. So a lot of things that I teach her, just like I taught my oldest son, Nasim, who's about to go to college in 2 weeks. And I'm in the process, I'm going to be teaching my 4-year-old son, Kwame. I'm just sharing it with the world. So I'm sharing it with the people. And I'm also modeling for parents how you too can teach your son or your daughter in similar ways to me, and you don't have to, if you watch one of the videos, you don't have to think that it's like a script that you got to stick to, it's like, it's meant to give you a guide. And then, you can take this piece and maybe you don't use another piece, or maybe, the way I speak with my daughter might not be as effective with your daughter or your son. And, it's cool. But I'm also trying to model how we as Black people can feel confident with teaching our own children math, because another goal I have, a long-term goal, is I want people to feel as comfortable with helping their children with math homework as I am. And because I do this for a living and I do it every day. Right. Just like somebody that was a Hall of Fame basketball player will feel comfortable helping his son, with basketball. Somebody that was a barber will feel comfortable, giving their son a haircut. I want people to feel that way with mathematics. And so I'm trying to show people that, it can be done and that we out here and we're doing it,
Well, thank you so much, Akil. I'm glad you stopped by Brazen Education. Please make sure you check out his book on Amazon. Go to the website, All This Math. All across social media is @allthismath. And also, as he said, you can follow on Facebook @Akil Parker. So thanks so much. And this is our first conversation about math on this podcast, but it will not be our last because I always ask people, what topics have we not covered yet that you really want us to cover? And math has repeatedly come up. So when I saw one of his videos, I said, who is this brother? Let me let me reach out. So I'm so glad I did because look, I got kids too, and I want to be able to continue to teach my own kids some math. So I appreciate you putting out resources that all parents, even parents like me, can use. So thank you so much.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.